Hey guys, it's Mr. Brown. As we continue to try to figure out exactly how we're going to handle this, and we continue to not know exactly how long it's going to last, hopefully just another week or so, but we don't know for sure. This is going to be really the first attempt at doing sort of, I guess you could say, a video lesson, and we'll see how it turns out. The lesson for tonight is on page 12 of your textbooks, and it is The Pardoner's Tale by Geoffrey Chaucer. The Pardoner's Tale is part of a much larger work written by Chaucer called the Canterbury Tales. He worked on it for the last 14 years of his life. We're in the Middle Ages. Chaucer wrote this story around, he probably started around 1386, and he worked on it, like I said, the last 14 years of his life. He wrote 22 stories. It's over 12,000 lines long, and that is only a fraction of what it was supposed to be. He originally envisioned the Canterbury Tales as 120 stories told by 30 characters. The premise of the story is that these 30 characters from every level of London society would gather together to go on a pilgrimage to Canterbury, where St. Thomas of Becket is buried. They believed that if you prayed at Becket's grave, you would be healed of what was wrong with you and absolved of your sins. In this time period, there's not anything that we would recognize as what we would call the middle class. You basically have the nobles and the commoners. The commoners are basically us, everyday average normal folk. The nobles, the princes, the dukes, the knights, the queens, the kings, all those folks, these are people who had political power. The commoners pretty much had none. Chaucer was a commoner. However, his dad was a very successful wine merchant and was loaded. And he paid for Geoffrey to have the sort of education that, generally speaking, you didn't see outside of the noble class. So Chaucer got to see his society in a way, perspective, that most of the people of his time period never would have had. He lived and worked amongst the nobles. He was not one of them, but they accepted him as a employee, a servant, so to speak. And he actually moved up fairly high in the ranks. He held a number of positions to King Richard II, including forester, squire, clerk, and actually spy. If you've ever seen the old Heath Ledger movie, The Knight's Tale, that's pretty much about Geoffrey Chaucer's time in France spying on those two countries for King Richard. Chaucer, with this unique viewpoint, saw that really, when push comes to shove, there's not a whole lot of difference between people. Not the high, not the low, not the wealthy, not the poor, not men, not women. What he saw was that we're all vulnerable to temptation, all of us. And with that in mind, he writes the Canterbury Tales to be what we call a cautionary tale. And I've included all this in your notes packet that I'm emailing out tonight. A cautionary tale is a story that warns against certain actions and behaviors. And in this particular case, what it's warning us against is the 7 deadly sins. Each of the stories focuses on one of the 7 deadly sins. And I've included all 7 in the notes packet again. But they're, generally speaking, you probably know most, if not all of them. Greed, lust, wrath, envy, pride, sloth. That's 6, and I can't remember the 7th one. What is it? Well, this is embarrassing. What is the 7th deadly sin? I promise, kids, guys, I actually am an English teacher. I know this stuff. You're probably already yelling it at me right now, and I can't hear you. Okay. Notes are good. Pride, greed, lust, wrath, gluttony, envy, and sloth. All right. Pride is not pride like we think of, I did a good job on something, I'm happy that I did well with this. This is, you are so arrogant, so conceited, your head is so swole, you probably couldn't fit through a door. All right. Greed is basically pertaining to material things, especially money. Wanting more than you need. All right. Not having money set aside for a rainy day, not understanding the usefulness of money, but basically just, I want it all. Scrooge McDuck swimming in a giant thing of money. All right. Lust, as it was defined in Chaucer's time, the Middle Ages, was sexual activity outside of marriage. All right. Wrath was anger to the point of doing violence or even murder. Gluttony is overconsumption to the point it begins to hurt your body. All right. Envy, very simply, is jealousy. Sloth is laziness. And we're not talking, we've got the time off now, I'm going to sleep a little late. We're talking so lazy that if breathing didn't come naturally, you'd suffocate. All right. Each of the Canterbury Tales focuses on one of these 7 deadly sins. And the character telling the story, these 30 characters, and Chaucer is actually one of the 30 characters. He's in his own story. They are basically condemning this particular sin. They are saying that it's bad, don't do this. Cautioning us, cautionary tale, against engaging in this particular sin. The irony is that each of the characters is the living, breathing poster child of that sin. For instance, there's a cook in the story. You can pretty much guess which sin he's guilty of, gluttony. Several other characters are guilty of other sins as well. The Pardoner's Tale, which we're focusing on tonight, Pardoner's were officials of the Roman Catholic Church, much like a modern-day priest, but with different responsibilities. And basically what they did was they went around and they sold forgiveness. Not like a modern Protestant church where you basically can be contrite and penitent and be forgiven of your sin, or like a modern Catholic church where you basically make confession to a priest and are assigned penance to do that way. You basically had to shell out coin. All right. And if you couldn't pay, well, there was the possibility of eternal damnation. These guys were not popular. Just like now, people needed their money. They also were pretty much con men. They were generally regarded as being kind of crooked, and a lot of them were because, again, temptation. They're handling a lot of money. Some of them basically sold what I call holy insurance. They would offer to sell you a piece of the cross, or the bones of a saint, or a bloody cloth that supposedly was the blood of Jesus on the cross, something of this nature. It was all junk. The piece of the cross was a piece of wood. The nail used in the crucifixion was just a nail. The bloody cloth, he cut himself shaving the day before. So things of this nature. All right. They were supposed to send all the money that they raised back to, their churches, but in a lot of cases, that money didn't make its way back to the churches. So Chaucer chooses this person to be his poster child of greed. So even while the Pardoner in the story is condemning the sin of greed and telling his fellow travelers not to engage in greediness, he's kind of, like I just said, he's the living embodiment of greed. Now, if you look on page 12 of your text, you'll see that the Learn About section tonight is on theme. The theme of a literary work is the central meaning or message that the author of the work tries to communicate to the reader. Theme is the meaning of the work as a whole, not simply an insight about a particular character or event. So simply stated, the theme is the lesson of the story. All right? Sometimes an author will choose to state a theme directly. Generally, though, the reader must determine the theme on his or her own. To figure out the theme of a literary work, ask yourself, what are the goals of the main character? How does he or she try to achieve them? How does he or she react to important events and other characters in the work? What is the eventual outcome of the character's efforts? Sometimes more than one character is responsible for getting across the author's theme. Sometimes, too, the author has more than one theme to get across. So basically, more often than not in a piece of fiction, the author is not going to come out and tell you that this is the lesson, boys and girls. It's going to be implied. You're going to have to read between the lines and figure out for yourself what the lesson of this story is, which means that one person will come up with something and he'll think that this is the theme. Somebody else will come up with another idea and they'll think that this is the theme. And somebody else will come up with something completely out of left field and think that that is the theme. And potentially, they're right. All right. Theme is very much open to the interpretation of the reader when it is implied. All right. While reading the Partner's Tale, ask yourself what significant actions do the characters perform? What theme or meaning can you determine from these actions? All right. So basically, obviously, this is also a thematic story, an allegorical story, in which it will basically attempt to teach a lesson. Now, the lesson of the Partner's Tale is pretty much blatantly, blindingly, obviously simple. Don't be greedy. All right. And generally, what we do is shorter pieces I will read to the class. Longer pieces, and especially plays, we engage in group reading. So I will read you the Partner's Tale. This thing reads like an evil Dr. Seuss rhyme. All right. In Flanders once there was a company of young folk that were bent on chasing folly. They danced and played at dice both day and night, and also ate and drank beyond their might. Now, right here in the first stanza, we've already got them on one of the 7 deadly sins. They ate and drank beyond their might. You got these 3 guys, these 3 hellraisers, who love to go out and cause just as much mayhem and trouble as they can physically survive. And it says they eat and drink beyond their might. Basically, gluttony. All right? These riders 3, of whom I will now tell, long before the sound of morning bell, were sitting in a tavern, talking, drinking, till too much drink began to cloud their thinking. Let each of us now pledge to both the others that we 3 are the best of brothers. Then up they jumped and hastened from the village, intent on riot, merriment, and pillage. All right, so one night they don't shut the bar down; they keep the bar open. The sun is coming up, and they're still thinking about what else can we get into. And as they leave, the oldest of the excuse me, allergies, not corona. The oldest of the 3 wraps his arms around his brothers, and he swears to them that we 3 will always be as brothers to each other. Always. Where'd the bar go? All right. When they had gone not fully half a mile, just as they were about to climb a stile, among some trees there lying on the ground a mighty heap of golden coins they found. The pile was huge, bushels as they thought. They'd have to haul it off and not get caught. Oh, each of them was so glad at the sight because the florins were so large and bright. They sat down then beside the precious hoard. The worst of them, he uttered the first word. Brothers, he said, now hear well what I say. My mind is clear, although I joke and play. Fortune's given us this precious treasure so that we may live out our lives in pleasure. We've got to carry all this gold away, but surely it cannot be done by day. This treasure must be carried off by night, as wisely and as slyly as we might. Therefore, I think that right now we should all draw lots to see to whom the lot will fall, to run to town and bring us bread and wine, so that before our labor we may dine. And 2 of us will keep close watch right here in case some other rascals might appear. Then they drew straws to see whose lot would fall, and it fell upon the youngest of them all, to make the quick trip back and forth to town. The other 2 shook hands and sat back down. Now, this story requires, obviously, a little willing suspension of disbelief. It's unlikely that you're just going to be strolling down a country street and country road and find a giant bushel sack of gold coins just sitting there. But they do. All right? And their reaction is pretty much what anybody's would be. Finders, keepers, losers, weepers. You know, you see a $20 bill sitting on the sidewalk and there's no one around, you're probably going to pick it up. All right? Let's be honest. And so the oldest of the 3, he seems to be the brains of the outfit. He says, all right, we can't just haul this off in the middle of broad daylight. Somebody's going to think that we robbed somebody and we'll end up hanging from a tree. At some point, maybe when we get back in class, we can discuss punishments that were, legally administered during this time period. Basically, from what we would call misdemeanor on down, you got the ever-living heck beat out of you. All right? Physical punishment. For felony and above, they usually just killed you, sometimes in pretty gruesome fashion, depending on what you had done. Anyway, so they don't want to get caught. All right? So he says we need to draw lots. We need to draw straws to see who's going to go back to town and get us something to eat, something to drink. We'll wait for it to get dark. And then when it gets dark, we'll haul it off to whoever's house is closest and we'll divvy it up. All right? So the youngest one gets the short straw. And that last line, right there in that last stanza, the other 2 shook hands and sat back down. All right? As soon as the other one's out of sight, the older two look at each other, and there's a little handshake. All right? Then one spoke thus unto the other, You know, my friend, that you're my best loved brother. Let's talk about this gold, just me and you. Why can't these coins be split between us two? The other answered, Fine, 2 now, not 3, but I know not just how that's going to be. He knows the gold is right here with us too. What shall we say to him? What shall we do? It won't be hard at all, the other said. We'll stab him through both sides and leave him dead. And then all the gold shall divided be, my dearest friend, between yourself and me. All right? So the other two, older two, are going to gang up on the younger one and kill him and take the gold for themselves. All right? The next stanza. The youngest then, the one who went to town, let evil fancies pull him down and down. The beauty of those florins, new and bright, there had to be a way, some plan that might win all the gold for him that very night. And soon it was his very clear intention to carry out a plan I hate to mention. He hurried on, no longer would he tarry, and once in town found an apothecary, like a modern-day pharmacist or chemist. And asked the man for poison. To kill rats, he said, and in my poultry yard polecats that raid my chicken coop most every night. I want to kill the vermin if I might. What I have here, said the apothecary, is something that is strong and very scary. To tell the truth, there is no living creature it will not kill. And another feature, a piece no bigger than a grain of wheat, is all that poor doomed creature has to eat. Taking the poison, away the rascal ran into the next street, where he met a man who sold him 3 small jugs of rosy wine. Alone again, he marked 1 jug. That's mine. I'll put the poison in the other 2, and then I'll return to see what it will do. Can y'all guess what's about to happen? Why need this sermon go on anymore? For as the 2 had planned so well before, just so they killed him, just like that. And then upon the bloody ground they sat. One said, Let's have a drink and make us merry, and afterward we'll his body bury. And with those words it happened that he took a bottle with the poison. Then with a look of joy he drank, and passed to his good friend the jug. Mercy, horrors, what an end! Thus both were poisoned for their homicide, and thus the fiendish poisoner also died. Ultimately, in Chaucer's time, and a lot of people still believe it today, the old expression, the wage of all sin is death. If you engage in one of the 7 deadly sins, eventually it will catch up with you and you will pay the ultimate price for it. All right? It will kill you and you will burn. All right? That was what they believed. And that was why people shelled out the money to the partners, even though they hated their guts. There was also a belief that one sin would lead you into others. All right, we've got these guys on 3 of the 7 deadly sins. All right, gluttony. They were blitzed out of their brains. All right, greed, which is the primary focus of this story. In their drunken state, maybe their judgment isn't great, but I kind of doubt that even dead sober, this probably something along these lines would not have happened. Greed is what ultimately motivates them to commit the 3rd sin. Wrath, they kill each other over the money. All right? And you know how the world works. You see this stuff on the news all the time. Somebody has something that somebody wants. They're willing to commit an act of violence to get it. Someone is basically doing something with someone they shouldn't be doing, and violence results from that. So on and so forth. Chaucer is completely unsympathetic to his 3 characters. You get that from the last 2 lines of the play. Thus both were poisoned for their homicide, and thus the fiendish poisoner also died. As far as Chaucer is concerned, these guys engaged in sinful behavior, antisocial behavior, whatever you want to call it, and as a result, they died for it, and he feels like their punishment is just. Like I said, it reads like an evil little Dr. Seuss rhyme. All right? It's one of my favorite stories in the book. We have a short bio of Chaucer on page 17. A lot of this stuff, my glasses are crooked. A lot of this stuff is stuff I already mentioned, but we'll go over it anyway. Geoffrey Chaucer, 1340 to 1400. Geoffrey Chaucer, often called the father of English poetry, was born in London, the son of a successful wine merchant. At the age of 17, he became a page in the royal household. His talents were recognized at once, and he went on to spend his entire working life in government service. He served as a soldier and as a squire and as a diplomat to France and Italy. Spy. All right. He held such posts as royal forester and clerk to King Richard II. In Chaucer's time, long before the invention of the printing press, there was no career called author or writer. For Chaucer, writing was a hobby. He worked hard at it, and several of his works survive. The best known is the great classic, The Canterbury Tales. It was begun in 1386 and was left unfinished at the poet's death. Chaucer's plan for the Canterbury Tales was an ambitious one. 30 characters drawn from every level of society would gather in London for a religious pilgrimage or journey to a famous sacred shrine in Canterbury. Parts of the long poem would involve these characters, from detailed descriptions of each to sudden arguments they might have. Other parts of the play, other parts would be the tales told by the characters to pass time during the trip. The result was a rich tapestry of the medieval world, not a formal history but an inside view. To read Chaucer is to learn that really, if we're probably honest, in very few ways have human beings changed over the last 600 years. Our societies have changed. Our technology has changed. The type of governments that we have changed. But I think when push comes to shove, people and the things they care about and the things that motivate them really haven't changed all that much. If you study history, and those of you who are in the American history class, what's one thing you're going to hear me say again and again and again is that all this has happened before and all of it will happen again. History, sometimes very regrettably, repeats itself. And I think Chaucer's stories and the truth of them, how we can basically very easily understand where Chaucer's coming from and the themes that he's teaching us, for the most part, a lot of them are still true today. All right. Now, you guys have your questions on pages 18 and 19. Remember, you're supposed to do the batch of questions under the Understand selection and under Think About theme. Once you guys have got that knocked out, email me in your work, and I will email you the tests. Also, there is a writing assignment going to be attached to this story. It will be due, let's say, Monday. And you'll email those in. I'll attach the instructions for that in the notes packet. But basically, I'm going to have you write a modern-day Canterbury Tale. And just like we see here in Chaucer's story, your main character is not going to have a happy ending. All right, they are basically going to be, even as our rioters were, guilty of a particular sin, maybe more than one sin, but one primarily, and ultimately they're going to pay for it. All right. Again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to email me or text, call if you need to. I'm at your disposal. Have a good night.